Today we're going to get into the incredible story of one of the world's most influential books, the Quran. We're going to follow its journey right from the very first revelation all the way to how it's been so meticulously preserved for over 1,400 years. All right, let's jump right in. So here's the big question, right? How is it even possible? It's a story that involves intense memorization, super careful scribbing, and what believers call a promise of divine protection. We're going to break down exactly how it happened, step by step.
So where does it all start? Well, our story begins with one single, life-altering event in a quiet, solitary cave, a moment that would literally change the course of history.
Okay, so picture this. Prophet Muhammad is 40 years old. He's in a cave, meditating, when suddenly the angel Gabriel appears. And even though the prophet couldn't read or write, the angel commands him 3 times, read. It's this incredibly intense moment that kicks off the entire Quranic revelation, starting with the first 5 verses of what we now know as Surah Al-Alaq.
And just think about what those very first words were. They aren't about laws, they aren't about rituals. The first command is to read. Right from the get-go, this sets up a core theme of knowledge, creation, and learning that you see woven throughout the entire Quran.
So you can imagine the prophet was deeply shaken by this experience. He rushed home to his wife, Khadijah, and it was her wisdom that calmed him down. Her words basically confirmed that this wasn't some bad omen, but actually a sign of his amazing character and the beginning of something divine.
Now, one of the most interesting things here is that the Quran didn't just appear overnight. It was revealed bit by bit over a span of 23 years. And this slow, gradual process, it was totally by design.
And that 23-year period, it's absolutely crucial. See, by revealing the message in pieces, it could directly speak to the challenges, the questions, and the day-to-day needs of the early Muslim community as they were actually happening.
And you can really see how this worked in practice. When they were in Mecca, the verses were all about building the very foundations of faith, the oneness of God, the afterlife. But later, in Medina, when they were building a whole society, the verses gave them a blueprint for laws, government, and social justice.
You know, some people at the time were asking, hey, why wasn't this whole book just sent down at once? Well, this verse was the answer. It explains that the gradual process was to strengthen the prophet's heart, make it way easier for everyone to memorize, and to give them guidance exactly when they needed it most.
Okay, so fast forward. The prophet has passed away. And suddenly, the community is facing this huge, urgent question. How on earth do we make sure that every single verse is preserved, perfectly, forever?
Well, luckily, during the prophet's own lifetime, they already had this amazing dual system in place. On one hand, you had hundreds of people who memorized the entire text, becoming, living, walking copies. On the other, you had scribes writing it all down on whatever they could find, palm leaves, stones, leather. And the prophet himself would review the whole thing every year with the angel Gabriel to make sure it was perfect.
But then, a tragedy struck that really lit a fire under everyone. At the Battle of Yamama, many of these expert memorizers were killed. This created a real sense of urgency. So, the Caliph Abu Bakr gave the massive job to the chief scribe, Zaid ibn Thabit. His task? To find every single written fragment and cross-reference it with the memories of those who are still alive, creating one single, verified master copy called the Suhuf.
And for Muslims, all of this incredible, detail-oriented human effort, it's seen as the fulfillment of this very promise from the Quran itself, that God would ultimately be its guardian.
All right, so the first master copy is safe. But a few years later, as the global Muslim community, the Ummah, started to grow, a completely new kind of problem popped up that threatened to divide everyone.
Think about it. Islam is spreading like wildfire from Persia to Egypt. You have all these new converts, and they're starting to recite the Quran in their own different Arabic dialects. Now, the words weren't changing, but the pronunciations were, and it was starting to cause some pretty serious arguments. They needed one standard version and fast. So the third caliph, Usman, made a really bold move. He got the old team back together, led by Zaid again, and had them use that original master copy, the Suhuf, as the one and only source. They created several standard copies in the prophet's own dialect, sent them out to all the major cities, and then they ordered all other personal copies to be destroyed. It was a decisive step to make sure there was absolute, lasting unity.
And that brings us all the way to the Quran we see today. For believers, its perfect preservation is actually just one of several things they consider to be a miracle.
So when people talk about the Quran being a miracle,
they're not just talking about its preservation. They're also talking about its literary beauty, which was said to be unmatched at the time, or its descriptions of things like embryonic development, which seemed way ahead of their time. And of course, its timeless guidance on justice and morality that people still find so relevant today.
I mean, just look at the sheer scale of this. It's kind of mind-blowing. You have over 1 billion Muslims worldwide. Millions of them, they're called Hafiz, have the entire book memorized, word for word, continuing that unbroken oral tradition. And yet, all across the planet, there is only one version of the Quran. Just one.
And that's really the key takeaway here. The Quran isn't seen as some dusty historical relic. It's a living book. It's meant to be engaged with every single day, recited, studied, and used as a practical guide for how to live a good spiritual life.
So we're back to where we started. The story of the Quran is this amazing tale of careful, meticulous preservation. And it leaves us with one last thing to think about. If a text can be protected from change so perfectly for over 1,400 years, what does that suggest about the power and timelessness of its message?